Today, we're working on one of the most useful patterns in Spanish for talking about imaginary situations, unlikely situations, or those classic life thoughts like, well, if I had more time, if I had more money, if I lived by the beach, I would be a completely different person, possibly with better coffee. The pattern is this: si plus the imperfect subjunctive, then the conditional. In Spanish, si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine. If I had time, I would go to the movies. This structure is for hypothetical present or future situations. In other words, not talking about what really happens, but what would happen in an imagined case. Think of it as the dream formula. Step 1, si, meaning if. The verb in the past-looking form that does not really mean past here, the imperfect subjunctive. Step 3, the result in would form, the conditional. Si tuviera, iría. Si pudiera, haría. Si supiera, diría. A quick memory trick. After si in this pattern, Spanish often uses the raw form, tuviera, pudiera, hablara, comiera, viviera. Then the second part often ends in ia. Iría, haría, comería, viviría. So your brain can remember it like a little rhythm. Si plus ra, then ia. Si tuviera, iría. Si pudiera, lo haría. Nice and musical. Let's build it slowly. Si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine. Tuviera means had, in this hypothetical sense. Iría means would go. Not I went, not I will go, but I would go. How do you say, if I had time, I would go to the movies? In Spanish. Si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine. Si tuviera más dinero, viajaría más. Si tuviera más dinero, viajaría más. Si tuviera más dinero, viajaría más. Excellent. Notice más dinero, more money, and viajaría, would travel. The conditional is often very friendly at B1 because it keeps that little ría sound. Comería, viviría, haría, podría. Let's make this more practical. You can use this pattern for advice, wishes, plans, regrets about the present, and polite imagination. For example, si pudiera, te ayudaría. If I could, I would help you. Si viviera cerca, iría más seguido. If I live nearby, I would go more often. Side note, seguido means often or frequently in many contexts. A handy little word. How do you say, if it rained tomorrow, we would stay home? Si lloviera mañana, nos quedaríamos en casa. Si lloviera mañana, nos quedaríamos en casa. Great. Lloviera comes from llover, to rain, and nos quedaríamos means we would stay. That little nos matters. Quedar means to stay only in some expressions, and quedarse en casa is the common phrase for stay home. Here's the big idea again. This structure is not for real routine conditions. If you mean something likely or normal, Spanish uses present after si. For example, si tengo tiempo, voy al cine. If I have time, I go to the movies, or I'll go. That is a real possibility. But si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine is more hypothetical, more like imagine if I had time. That contrast is extremely important. Present plus present or future for real possibilities. Imperfect subjunctive plus conditional for hypothetical ones. Let's hear the contrast side by side. Si tengo tiempo, te llamo. If I have time, I'll call you. Si tuviera tiempo, te llamaría. If I had time, I would call you. One sounds possible and open. The other sounds imagined or less likely. How do you say if you studied more, you would understand better? Si estudiaras más, entenderías mejor. Si estudiaras más, entenderías mejor. Nice. Estudiaras is from estudiar, and entenderías is would understand. Mejor means better. Very useful sentence, especially if you want to sound like a kind teacher and not a villain in a grammar castle. Now let's talk about one superstar phrase, si yo fuera tú. If I were you. You will hear this all the time. Literally, if I were you. And then usually some advice follows. Si yo fuera tú, descansaría. If I were you, I would rest. Si yo fuera tú, no compraría eso. If I were you, I wouldn't buy that. How do you say if I were you, I would rest in Spanish? Si yo fuera tú, descansaría. Si yo fuera tú, descansaría. Beautiful. Here I included yo because this phrase often keeps it for clarity and rhythm. Si yo fuera tú. It's one of those common fixed feeling expressions. Another very common verb is poder. Si pudiera means if I could. Listen, si pudiera elegir, viviría cerca del mar. If I could choose, I would live near the sea. By the way, mar is usually el mar, but sometimes poets play with la mar. Unless you are writing sea poetry on a boat at sunset, stick with el mar. How do you say if I could choose, I would live near the sea in Spanish? Si pudiera elegir, viviría cerca del mar. Si pudiera elegir, viviría cerca del mar. Very good. And here's another useful one with tener. Si no tuviera que trabajar, dormiría más. If I didn't have to work, I would sleep more. Tener que means to have to. Super practical. How do you say if I didn't have to work, I would sleep more? Si no tuviera que trabajar, dormiría más. Si no tuviera que trabajar, dormiría más. Excellent. Now, a few common mistakes to avoid. First mistake, using conditional after si. Native English speakers often want to say, si tendría tiempo. But no, after si in this pattern, use the imperfect subjunctive, si tuviera tiempo. Then conditional in the result, iría. So not si tendría tiempo, iría. Correct is si tuviera tiempo, iría. Second mistake, using the present when the meaning is clearly imaginary. If you say, si tengo $1,000,000, compraría una isla, that mixes a real condition form with a hypothetical result. Better, si tuviera $1,000,000, compraría una isla. And yes, very practical Spanish, because apparently we all need island vocabulary. How do you say, if I had $1,000,000, I would buy an island in Spanish? Si tuviera $1,000,000, compraría una isla. Si tuviéramos más tiempo, terminaríamos hoy. Si tuviéramos más tiempo, terminaríamos hoy. Si tuviéramos más tiempo, terminaríamos hoy. How do you say, if she knew the answer, she would tell us in Spanish? Si supiera la respuesta, nos la diría. Si supiera la respuesta, nos la diría. One more memory aid before we wrap up. Think of this pattern as two steps. Imagined condition, si plus ra form. Imagined result, would form, often with ria. So your mental chant can be, si tuviera, iría. Si pudiera, haría. Si supiera, diría. Tiny rhyme, big help. And remember, Spanish uses this pattern all the time for polite opinions and soft suggestions too. Si yo fuera tú, esperaría un poco. If I were you, I'd wait a bit. It sounds natural, thoughtful, and very conversational. Let's recap. Today's core idea was the hypothetical present or future condition in Spanish. Si plus imperfect subjunctive then conditional. Si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine. Use it for imagined situations, unlikely situations, advice, and wishes. After si, do not use the conditional here. Use forms like tuviera, pudiera, hablara, comiera, viviera. Then use the result with would. Iría, haría, viajaría, entendería. If this still feels new, that is completely normal. This pattern becomes comfortable through repeated listening and speaking, not through wrestling it dramatically at midnight. Try making 3 personal sentences right after this. Maybe, si tuviera más tiempo. Si viviera en otra ciudad. Si pudiera aprender cualquier cosa. Make them about your real life, even if imaginary. Especially if imaginary. You're doing great. This is a big, useful structure, and every time you hear or say si tuviera, iría, your Spanish becomes more flexible, more natural, and more expressive. Keep going, and if yo fuera tú, seguiría practicando.